was for a second. Who am I? I'm Noel McDermott. I'm your host, and it's really good to have you. We've got Elizabeth Burton-Phillips with us and Sharon Harris with us, who are both from an amazing organisation called DrugFAM. And I'm going to put my hand up and say I've got a bit of a skin in that game, as I'm one of the trustees on the board. So I'm technically Sharon's boss, I think. It's all right, Sharon, you don't have to salute or treat me with any respect whatsoever. In fact, the less the better, to be honest. So let's clap me around a little bit. So it's going to be a great evening, and Elizabeth is somebody who I have a great deal of admiration for as a human being. Her story is pretty profound and amazing, how DrugFAM come back. We'll get to hear a bit about that. But first, I'm just going to do the sort of what we call the furniture moving bit of the show, which is to just give you some details. So this is the Wellbeing Show. It's live on a Wednesday evening, if you're listening to it on a Wednesday evening between 9 and 10 in the UK, which means we'd love to hear from you. We stream live on various social media platforms, I believe on Periscope, which is Twitter. And as I'm an ancient dinosaur, I'm not quite sure I know what that is. I thought it was something to do with submarines, but apparently not. We're also on Facebook Live, and we're on YouTube, on the YouTube channel. So it'd be lovely if you drop some comments in one of those streams, and my team are going to be sort of watching those and sending you comments through if you have them. You can also give me a call on this thing, a mobile phone. And the number's 07506 319 745. It's +44 if you're dialing from outside the UK, +44 7506 319 745. You can use WhatsApp if you want to call and save charges for yourself. Again, be lovely to hear from you, and I'll get you on the show. I'll make you famous. There you go. That's an offer you don't get every night. Anyway, that's enough from me, and on to introducing our guests. And I, in no particular order, I'm going to say hi to Sharon.
Hello.
Hello, Sharon. How are you doing?
I'm good, thanks. Yeah, nice
Great.
to be here.
It's good to have you here. Tell us about what you do at DrugFAM and sort of why you came along this evening.
Okay, so I have a son who's in addiction.
Right.
And I was a client at DrugFAM 4 years ago, and I launched through the door in a heck of a state, not knowing how I was going to deal with what I was about to deal with. And from there, I had support, and I'm in a really good place now because DrugFAM have helped me get there. And I was offered a position a year ago as office manager, and I also manage Elizabeth's diary. So yeah, all good.
You're a very brave person for managing Elizabeth's diary.
Absolutely.
Anybody trying to manage any aspects of Elizabeth's life, I think,
I agree,
is well on the way to a knighthood.
I agree.
Damehood, probably, isn't it? If you're a lady, it's a damehood. Hello, Elizabeth. How are you?
Hello, I'm good, thank you. Yeah, really well. Yes, I really love being insulted. It's great.
I love insulting, so this is going to be a great, fun evening. So really good to have. Tell us about you. Who are you and why are you here?
Who am I? Well, I'm just an old age pensioner, really. It's the truth, you know. Just celebrated my 70th birthday.
You have, haven't you? It's extraordinary.
I have, yeah, I have. But, you know, I was telling all my friends, you know, the brain feels like 17, but the body feels like 170. But yeah, I'm very busy. Very passionate about what I do, supporting families affected by addiction, supporting the bereaved, doing a lot of work now with Sharon, virtual work in schools, presenting actions and consequences, that kind of thing. Just really busy, enjoying the work that I do. Sharon and I get on really well. She comes to my house every Wednesday normally. This week it didn't happen, but yeah, we work together, very good partnership. And yeah, pretty.
You're the founder of DrugFAM. I'm going to sort of seed the conversation that way. Tell us about DrugFAM and what it does.
Okay, so DrugFAM is a charity that was established following the death of my son Nicholas 16 and a half years ago from heroin addiction. He died by suicide from this addiction to drugs, and he was a twin, and he and his brother were in addiction for several years before he died. And after he died, because of what I went through, a period of loneliness and isolation, I felt that I wanted to do something in his memory that was actually out there supporting families, because at the time that we were going through it, I couldn't find any what I would call sort of core support for myself. There was a lot of stuff out there to help the boys in terms of what was known as the drug and alcohol action teams and things like that, but there wasn't obviously so much in your face available for family members. And so DrugFAM, which is actually, it's registered as the Nicholas Mills Foundation, trading as DrugFAM, was set up a couple of years after he died. And here we are now, all these years on, working 7 days a week on a helpline, supporting families. And obviously, not only that, doing other things like email support, Zoom meetings, group meetings. I think, Sharon, you could comment on how busy we are on a Monday night, because we have I cover a group of clients that come to Whitney on Zoom. I used to go physically there, but now it's all on Zoom, and it's wonderful because we can bring in clients from all over the place. You know, we've had clients come in from Cornwall, from Tunbridge Wells, from just all over the place. At the same time, running concurrent to that, we've got a group in Peterborough and a group in Swallowfield near Wokingham. On other nights of the week, we've got groups in, I think it's Boreham Wood and High Wycombe. And Sunday mornings, we've actually got a very successful group over in Sandhurst. And that's just dealing with families and significant others who have got a loved one in addiction to drugs or alcohol. And yeah, so we're just, that's us really, very busy.
Sharon, you were one of those families that...
Yes, I was. It was a very difficult time for me, because I hadn't realised for a very long time that my son was an addict. Because I knew nothing about drugs.
Let's just stop there, because you know, I mean, that's a really interesting statement. It's a really interesting statement, and I think let's unpick that a little bit, because people who know exactly what you're talking about. This thing about this denial that happens around it, and sort of but then I think a lot of people go, how could you not have known? Was that, I mean, I don't know if that was shared by you as an experience, that you were in denial about your sons and their experience, but this denial is well known in the field, as is the statement you've made, Elizabeth, that there's virtually no services for families. You know, it's all about the addict.
Yeah.
And almost nothing until people like yourself came around. Almost nothing. Although every DAT team, drug and alcohol team, that's it you referred to, will tell you they do family work. But I can tell you that they don't. They have a group, maybe if you're lucky, once a week that nobody turns up to, because they don't want to be anywhere near all the other stuff that's going on. So there is virtually nothing for families that's going on, and which is why DrugFAM is a unique thing. But Sharon, how could you possibly not have known? Come on.
I didn't. I seriously didn't. My son was, my youngest son, well, both of them were addicts, but one is now clean and one isn't. He was they both went through a difficult time, because I was in domestic violence. They saw things they shouldn't have seen. And you always think that maybe those things that they should never have seen caused them to go down a path which I had no control over. But my youngest was in trouble a lot at school, and he was in trouble with the police. And at 19 and 20, they left home. So because I was at breaking point and I had bricks through my window and stuff like that. So in the end, we parted company. I set them up in a flat, but I had no idea, what he was doing. None whatsoever. I didn't know.
What was he doing in terms of the addiction? What was he using? What was going on?
He apparently, unbeknown to me, he started off with, he smoked cigarettes. Then he went on to cannabis, and then from cannabis he went to cocaine, and then eventually the biggest demon he has was crack cocaine.
Okay.
And it was only one day when he turned up at my door after I had my first experience with DrugFam, which was a one-to-one with one of the family support workers, that he came to the house and actually admitted he was a drug addict.
Okay.
And I had no idea. And that broke my heart.
Yeah.
And the devastation it causes is completely unbelievable. I mean, it nearly destroyed my marriage. You know, he's cost thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds. And as a mum, you love your children. All you want is for them to be happy. And you think you can fix it.
Yeah.
And you think you can take away their pain. I still live with guilt every day, because I think that because of what's happened in my life has made him turn out the way he has. But with DrugFam support, it's obviously made me realise that it isn't my fault, that it was a choice he made. But it is the most horrific thing.
Nevertheless, even though you've done obviously a lot of work, and I totally agree with you as a clinician, you didn't cause it, you can't cure it, etc., etc. But nevertheless, you started off the conversation with, well, I was in domestic violence. Maybe that's what led. My response would be, how many people experience domestic violence and how many of them? It's not a one-to-one relationship by any stretch of the imagination. Do you know what I mean? So it couldn't possibly be causative in its relationship. There's a correlation, obviously, between trauma and people self-medicating and things like that. But there's also just as much of it is nature and inherited stuff. And one thing I would say to my clients who I deal with is I explain to them that there are things like alcoholic bees, alcoholic monkeys, addict horses. And so what on earth has addiction got to do with human child rearing practices if it's a trans-species event? How on earth can it be about the way you do or don't bring up your child? Because as far as I know, you didn't bring up any horses, and humans don't, and we don't bring up bees. So if it's happening in other species, which it does, and we know it does, then it has very little really, or it has some relationship towards sort of what we do in environmental impact. And it's one of those things, we should just get this really clear for people that are listening. It's one of those things that does have an inherited component, and we figure what 60-40, 70-30 split between environment and inherited and all that sort of stuff. It can't possibly be you. But nevertheless, I think that's, you know, one of the things that you're describing is a classic thing that a parent will do, which is that they will look for a way of avoiding what is really going on.
And I was the classic enabler. I mean, I was probably, my addiction was him, because I was enabling him so much, and I couldn't bring myself to stop doing that. Yeah, it was absolutely horrendous.
Can you say more about that? I'm going to bring you into the conversation in a minute. That's all right, Elizabeth. But I think.
Oh yeah, sure.
I was completely entwined in his life with the enabling. I couldn't say no. I couldn't, because I just hated what he was doing, and I just thought he was going to die. So I just kept throwing everything at him, and I now realise that's not what you should do. You know,
it's very frightening for you, though.
It is. It's very frightening, and it's still frightening now. Although I'm in a much better place, because you have no control of it, and you don't know how it's going to end. I wish I could, in my words, as I've explained to Elizabeth before, open up his head and pull his brain out and find out what is going on. You know, but I can't do that. But I've learned.
But I think you'd get unusual results if you did. You wouldn't get what you wanted.
No.
And sort of every attempt to create Frankenstein's monster as
absolutely. But also, I've got two boys that were both on drugs, and one is clean, married, and happy. Yeah. And yet I've got one that still uses. So it is really a difficult situation to be in, really.
Yeah. And in terms of the impact upon you, because we're not here to talk about the addicts and.
Oh my goodness, the impact. Right. Well, when I came to DrugFam, I'd lost 3 stone in weight. Wow. I wasn't eating, wasn't sleeping. I don't know how I was functioning doing my job, but I did. I think that was my saving grace. Work was my saving grace because it took my mind off everything. I wouldn't switch my phone off. I used to take it to bed every night. And I used to drive to try and find him, drive around at night in the middle of the night, trying to see if he was alive or dead. I put my, I nearly wrecked my marriage because I put him first before my husband. And my husband, for 21 years, all he's ever known is my son's addiction.
Yeah.
And it's been really as difficult for him as it has been for me. And he hates to see what he's done to me because he's destroyed me at times. And it's about your well-being as well. I mean, if I hadn't have walked through that door, Noel, and got the support that I needed, I don't actually think I'd be here now.
And what was the support? Was it some sort of complex mental health team that parachuted in and meds and all of that sort of stuff?
The last company that I worked for, my boss, who actually knew what was going on, could see my transformation overnight and saw that I was in a really bad place. And she said, what we could see was you falling into a black hole and not coming back.
Yeah.
And she said to me one day, you have to go and get some help. And I had no idea where to go or who to talk to. So I did what every other person does, ask Frank.
Okay. And what did Frank say?
And they signposted me to DrugFAM.
Like they always do.
Absolutely.
And I had
no
my
idea. Speak to DrugFAM, they might have an idea of. And what was the support you got that has transformed?
Well, so first of all, I was really, really nervous about making that first step. So I rang and I spoke to.
What you were nervous about? Do you remember?
I was, because it was a big thing to have to face the fact that you've got to try and get some help for you, and also talk about your son as with the addiction. Right. And so I had a one-to-one with one of the family support workers. Yeah. And the most interesting, I found really quite alarming was I had no idea what a drug was or what it looked like or what it did. Or, I mean, I must have been so goddamn naive. It must have been unbelievable. But I saw Steve.
I just had this urge to come over and give you a big hug and go,
I know.
You poor thing, you poor dear. Do you know what I mean? It's like, good Lord.
Place in the office with samples of, not real drugs, obviously, I hate it, but samples of what they look like. And I was absolutely, I couldn't believe it, really. And I couldn't believe what this substance was, what the highlight of this substance was, or what it, I just couldn't believe it. But with their help, I was able to put boundaries in place, so that
sort of reiterate to people who might be listening that's such a classic story. Yeah. The way family members are bamboozled by the addicts into not being able to see anything at all, and manipulated into only seeing what the addict wants you to see, so that you'll meet the addict's needs, which is to facilitate and enable their addiction. And so the stories that you get as a family member are, and they may well have a truth to them. If I don't do this, I'll die. This has happened. This tragedy has happened to me. This disaster has happened to me. And it becomes all about what we call the unmanageability in their lives. And so the family member runs around trying to manage the addict's life for them. And the addict's life is essentially unmanageable. And the first thing you've got to learn as a family member is, I can't manage that for them. They have to manage it for themselves. And because you're so caught up in dealing with all these crises and dramas that the addict has created for themselves, you actually can't really see the wood for the trees.
That's right.
And it's such a classic story, which is why I want to give you a hug, because it's like...
But for me, it was chaos. It was chaos. I was frightened. I didn't know what I was doing. I mean, the first time I switched my phone off, I was having palpitations, because I thought, if I switch my phone off and he wants to get hold of me, I won't be able to speak to him. No. And you know what? I switched it off and I couldn't sleep because I'd switched it off.
You poor thing.
But eventually, I did it more and more, and then I was okay with it. But it took a long time to get me into that place. It was like baby steps, really.
So the type of support you were getting was information. So like you were told, oh, it's addiction, and these are what drugs look like, and these are the things you need to do, practical things like you actually need to turn your phone off and stop sort of being available 24/7. Yes, you won't sleep for the first week when you do that, but just get over it. And then you will eventually start sleeping. You found these things to be true and to be helpful.
Absolutely. And then I thought to myself, actually, it's quite nice having your phone switched off, because you get a bit of peace. You know, well, I mean, that word peace is great all by itself, but you know, but you learn to do these things. But it took a while, and I had quite a few one-to-ones. And then I moved into the group, and what a relief
was it
when you go into a group and you find that you're not the only one, and that there is someone else that has experienced the same problems you have, and they're going through it.
Was it not just weird going into a bunch of people all moaning about life? Is that what happened?
Well, that as well. That as well.
So what happened in the group? I mean, is that what happened? People are just sat around being really sad and sort of...
I mean, I think it's you offload, and it's your sanity, because if you don't, I mean, bearing in mind, I never told a soul. I never spoke about it. Because the stigma and the shame. And because I used to go to work and I used to hear, oh, well, my daughter's off to university and my daughter's getting married. Oh, my son's got this and he's doing that. What can I say? Oh, well, my son's a drug addict. You know, you just feel so ashamed. And in the end, I never talked about them. And some of the people found it very odd that I wouldn't talk about my children, because I didn't want to. Because I was so ashamed.
And also, I guess it was out with other people's experience. I mean, I think there's something about sharing your story with other people who've had a similar experience, which does reduce shame. But actually, crucially, and this is, again, just as information for people, it's called emotional regulation. That's why talking to other people works, because that's what we're biologically designed to do. And when we share difficult stuff with other people and we get back compassionate responses, that increases our internal capacity, our neurological capacity to soothe ourselves. That's what goes on. And if we don't do that, then we don't soothe, and literally the feelings get worse. And so that's what was happening to you when you weren't talking to people, is that the feelings were literally getting worse inside your mind. There was a buildup of toxic stress hormones in your body, which led to all sorts of problems for you. And as soon as you start talking to people about it, and you're describing it perfectly, that level of toxicity drops.
And it was just a relief to be in with other people who could have experienced the same things, didn't judge you. But and they would talk about the money that they'd given to the person, or did this, and I thought, God, I've done that. Oh my God, I've done that. Oh God, I've done that as well, and that. But it was so refreshing, if you like, to hear a bunch of people talking about all their problems, and I was no different from them.
You rejoin the human race by this.
Absolutely, and then it became my strength, because everybody needs to offload. And if you don't offload, where does it go? And you become ill. So
it goes into toxic acting out in all our other relationships, as you perfectly described with your husband. That's where it went, and of course it goes. Elizabeth, you're sort of being unusually quiet for you. I've never known you to be this quiet. I'm beginning to think there's something wrong with you, but you're being polite, aren't you?
I'm nodding and agreeing and identifying with.
I mean, you have these two hats here. One which is the founder, but also you're a mother as well who went through this. And I guess you're really identifying with what Sharon is saying.
Yes, I am very much so. I mean, all the the shame and the stigma and keeping it secret, certainly going to work for me as a teacher was very, very important. It kept me going. It kept me psychologically well, in a sense, because it gave me a sense of purpose, of something to do. I could block the addiction out of my mind while I was at work, knowing that I had to face it when the school day came to an end. And I became a master of keeping secrets. from my colleagues, from my
Did your
pupils.
kids grow up in domestic violence? Were you beaten up by your partner and stuff like
No,
that?
not at all. No, no.
What sort of environment did your kids grow up in?
I would say very ordinary, really. You know, their dad's a civil engineer. He's retired now, and you know, very, very ordinary. There was a sign of addiction through my daughter, who became very anorexic and bulimic in her teenage years. But that's because I was teaching in an all-girls school. That was something that I was quite used to, effectively dealing with. But the boys going into addiction and becoming heroin addicts was something that I would never have dreamed of happening.
And I guess as a childcare expert, as a teacher, you understood how children operated. So your parenting strategies were thoughtful in that sense.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, we had a really, I think I look back on those times and they were really with great fondness in their, particularly in their primary school years. And I know all kids can be stroppy teenagers. I'm familiar with all of that through years of working with them. But it just, I think mine's a classic example of you don't think it's ever going to happen to you. And you know, I think it's easier to manage something like, when I say manage, it's either easier to embrace something like bulimia or anorexia, because it hasn't quite got that stigma and shame about it. There's more
Most people don't
compassion.
think of it in terms of addiction anyway.
Yes.
And it's not even defined in that terms. It's defined as illness rather than anything else. So
yes. So I think
what I'm interested in, though, is this thing. And again, you know, trying to hammer home this message. I mean, here's two different childhood experiences, one which was traumatic, one which wasn't traumatic. And yeah, still two boys and both addicts. I mean, so what does that say? Well, it says addiction is bigger than whatever the parents are doing, as far as I can tell. And it's a very familiar story to me. And even with these big differences between you as people in terms of your life experience, etc., you seem to be united by this experience of addiction and it being in your children. And it seems to me that as human beings, you have a lot of similarities and common bonds because of it. Am I understanding that correct about you both?
Yes, I would say that there's an identification which goes on immediately within a group setting or within a one-to-one setting that draws you together. And this is whether there's active addiction going on or whether you've been bereaved. If you've been bereaved, you share that common sorrow, that common painful experience of knowing what it's like to lose somebody, whether it's overdose or otherwise. And same with active addiction, the family members know that if you like, their hearts are all in the same place, their anguish is all in the same place, their worries are all in the same place. And there's an immediate caring that comes out of that for one another. And that's very evident in our support groups.
Yeah, it's very evident in sort of just watching both of you operate this evening together and seeing that bond is really strong between you.
Yeah, it is. And I've only, my whole life, I've lived with addiction because I had my brother was a gambler. And he literally gambled away. My parents lost everything, absolutely everything. And so all my childhood was about him, and I got tossed to the side because my mum was so engrossed in trying to help my brother and bailing him out and trying to fix my brother. And then here I am in a situation with two boys, and I'm going through the same cycle again, but in a different aspect of it, if you see what I mean. So I've only ever known my whole life as addiction. And that's quite sad. That's quite sad.
Yeah, it is. It is very
sad. But
Elizabeth, I want to come back to you if that's all right, and because I'm intrigued as to how you took such a tragic situation, and I know more of the story, and we haven't really gone into the details of the story, but you know, one of your sons found your son who killed himself, and it was you know, there was the ambulances came. It was a very traumatic experience, for you as a family. And your other son is now clean and sober and has been for a long time. I know he works in the charity. I've met him. I'm not going to name him because it's important that he maintains his sort of anonymity, as it were. But what how do you? I mean, I'm sort of interested, I guess, and I think other people will be interested. How you go from a tragedy like that to creating a response, which is DrugFAM. I mean, I think I would go under genuinely if I had to deal with that, but you didn't. I mean, how on earth did you manage to get from there to here?
I have been asked this many times before, and I believe that I was driven. There was something inside of me driving me to do something, and I think that it was partly because I needed to almost exorcise the experience out of my system by doing something positive out of a negative. And making it's very important for anybody who's going through this to make that person's name, whether they are alive or dead, to make that person's name worth talking about. And DrugFAM gave me the opportunity to make Nicholas's life worth talking about in memory. And that, I think, is what drove me from an emotional point of view.
It's like I'm hearing, it's almost like the opposite of shame.
Yes.
You do the opposite of shame with it. You transform shame into something else.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. It gave dignity to him in death. And I mean, as a mother, I was a classic rescuer and enabler, and no boundaries. Thought it was my duty as a mother, to sort it all out. And eventually I didn't. It was sorted out. He sorted it out himself. We've always believed as a family that Nicholas gave Simon life, and the death of his twin brother gave him the freedom to live the drug-free life that he has now. And we can't prove it, but all the good that has come out of that tragic death has benefited a lot of people. And that's really, I suppose, why all these years on, especially having written the book as a therapeutic write as well, and that all that's developed from the book, it means that I can speak about it without fear, without shame, without stigma, without prejudice towards me, and with lived experience that good can come out of sad things, and that there is a life ahead that is fun.
Fun, full, and transformative. I mean, that idea of transformation, I think, is very important in sort of recovery from these types of experiences and the ongoing lived recovery that people sort of need to get into. And you just explained it in a very sort of clear and very powerful way, that you give voice to these things, because there's something quite uniquely horrible in one sense about addiction as a mental illness. Is the way it is stigmatized, and it's stigmatized for probably understandable reasons, because addiction expresses itself not as addiction. It expresses itself as Sharon has described. It expresses itself as chaotic behavior. It expresses itself as antisocial behavior. It expresses itself as school failure. It expresses itself as depression, as psychosis, and various things. That these things are all the signs of addiction, if you know what you're looking for, and you're not caught up in the situation. But it's unpleasant and antisocial addiction in terms of the social consequences, and it leads to stigmatization of the families, particularly when there's enabling going on and people can see the enabling. But what people are not understanding about the enabling is that the family member is not aware that that's what they're doing.
Yes, that's right. It's when you wake up and realize, and the penny drops.
And because the family member has been bamboozled by the addict, and then that's the truth of it. They've been manipulated, bamboozled by the addict, and the addicts themselves are probably quite bamboozled as well. Before anybody thinks I'm blaming the addict, it's not. It's everybody's bamboozled by this thing. Everybody's caught up in the denial and the defense mechanisms. And I'm just aware that if people are listening and they're finding this triggering because they're thinking of themselves in the situation, don't bother phoning Frank. Just call DrugFAM directly.
Yeah, call us 0300 888 3853.
Say that again, Elizabeth, so we know the number and people can.
It's 0300 888 3853 or email office@drugfam.co.uk.
So don't bother with being signposted in. Just go straight there. Go straight to the doors.
Save yourself a call. Don't bother with Frank.
Absolutely. Because now it exists, and I'm going to move the conversation on a little bit, if that's all right. And we'll put the phone number in the posting and the website link and stuff like that. So, folks, don't worry if you didn't pick up on it. It'll be there for you, and you'll be able to reach out. So let's move the conversation on a little bit into, what's going on currently with DrugFAM, what the services are, and how it's responding to the coronavirus and the various things. We were just talking about, just before the show started, about this, I think, unfortunate word lockdown, and I'm just really annoyed. I'm just really annoyed about it.
Yes.
I'm really annoyed the way this word is used. It's frightening people. We're not going back into lockdown. That is not what's going to happen. It is not what happened in France this evening or Germany. What's happened are very targeted and thought out responses around managing social interaction so that we reduce infection rates. That's what's going on. And the press, I'm afraid, are just desperate to use this word because it sells papers or sells advertising space. I don't know what it sells. It's just nonsense.
It's a shock horror factor, isn't it?
It really is.
And let's panic everybody. So we'll all go out buying toilet rolls.
Why? There's enough toilet rolls. I've got some here if you run out. So give me a call. I'll give you some. So tell me about how has DrugFAM managed, firstly, what are the services that you're offering at the moment, and what was the impact of the pandemic in no particular order, what's been happening? I think Sharon's going to jump in. Let's
sorry. I think it's been the pandemic we've had to adapt very, very quickly,
right? Because
obviously we were offering services that were meeting clients face to face, and the groups were face to face. So, in order to be able to provide the support that our clients still needed, we set up virtual meetings online via Zoom and Teams. Yeah. So, in actual fact, it was really good for us because it's opened up doors. In as much as that we were still able to support our clients, still hold the groups, still had the one-to-ones. But the biggest thing for us was we opened what's called a national group. So whereas before we may have been limited to the people that we could reach out to, i.e. when they could come into the office or have face-to-face, because of a national group, we've now reached out North, South, Wales, Scotland, all over the UK. It's been absolutely amazing. So all the people that we have not been able to reach before have now come onto our national group, and that's growing by the week. So
give me some idea, Elizabeth, of how many people that you're helping at the moment and the types of services. You mentioned something about a telephone line and emails and groups.
Yeah, that's right.
What's going on and how many people you're helping at the moment?
Regular on a day-to-day basis, people can reach us through the phone if they just want to talk, or they can reach us by email. Sometimes they're a little bit nervous about picking up the phone. So there's a system.
If you call the number, they're going to get you?
They're going to get one of the team.
Okay.
They'll get DrugFAM, yes. They'll get one of the team. Yes. So that they have a choice. Some people, you can see from office@drugfam.co.uk that some people are saying, putting their foot in the water and saying, I think I need some support here because of X, Y, and Z. Could somebody give me a call, or could I join a group, or I can see that you operating Zoom groups, could I join, and so on. And so that is happening 7 days a week from 9 till 9. I
Right.
mean, I'd just go back to the first week of lockdown. I can remember, I don't know if you remember me having this conversation with you, Sharon. I think Jill might have been involved as well, the lady who manages the helpline. But we were thinking, oh, well, what are we going to do? It's all gone quiet. And what are we going to do? And, you know, do we carry on working? Do we close down? What do we do? And then all of a sudden, bang, off it went. And it's got so busy, didn't it?
Yeah.
Sharon, so busy. And sadly, I mean, I can say this with absolute hand on heart, sadly, we've had 37 bereavements since the 23rd of March. And I know this because I write personally to anybody who is bereaved and send them our bereavement packs. And then depending on what their needs are, then I will signpost them to other members of the team, or Sharon will do that, and they'll then have the opportunity to have one-to-one Zoom or one-to-one telephone. And some people just like to have a lot of email correspondence before they feel ready to talk to somebody on the phone. So yeah, it's just been incredibly busy, and that's shown because of the COVID, that in quite a lot of cases, the person who is in addiction has been living with the family members, and the ripple effect on that has been significant because of where and how they're going to get their drugs from, and how that impacts on the finances of the people that they're living with, and you know, the mum, can you lend me 20 quid, etc. So we're just really, really busy. But what we try to do is to respond quickly to everybody who communicates with us, and to make sure that they get the help that they deserve in their own right as a family member, friend, or significant other.
And so tell me, you know, roughly per year, if you know, how many sort of phone calls are you getting, and do you know those types?
Well, our call rate, our calls since the pandemic, our calls have gone up 75%.
Right.
So it's quite a substantial amount. I can't give you the exact figures.
I just wondered if you knew off the top of your head. It doesn't mean that. I mean, I sort of do know because I've seen the figures because I'm one of the trustees. So I was just sort of seeding the ground, and there has been an exponential shift. And I think that description you have at the beginning of the pandemic of that sort of like an in-breath, and people just sort of went, and then suddenly went, "Oh my God!"
Yeah.
And suddenly it was all over the place, wasn't it? And the sort of
yeah.
But again, this sort of what is interesting me in the conversation is that rather than panic over it, you've transformed the situation again. That's a really tough situation, the pandemic, and the impact of that. But it's actually had a transformative effect on the organisation and is supporting growth.
Yes, indeed it has, because we were talking before the pandemic, I don't know whether it was in a trustees meeting or general meeting, but we were certainly talking about growing the charity physically in different hubs around the country. And it suddenly has come to light that we don't need to do that because the technology is available for us to operate in a completely different way. We can reach, we've learned to reach so many more people as a result of this, and to not let the virus stop us from doing the work that we need to do. And it's, you know, it is my belief personally that addiction is much more powerful than COVID.
Yeah, and just I'm going to, just as a matter of information for people who are listening and watching, just echo that we know the figures are demonstrating that issues around substance misuse and addiction, of course, have shot up during the pandemic, and are continuing to. You know, very simple figures like the amount of alcohol being bought in supermarkets shot up by 45%, has not dropped.
That's right.
And the alcohol consumption in pubs has gone up. You know, it's ridiculous the amount of alcohol that people are stuffing inside themselves at the moment, and the sort of problems that's going to cause. And we know that domestic violence rates have shot through the roof, and they've not gone down, etc., etc. etc. So all of these indicators of, and the evidence that we're getting about how during the more controlled phase, the early phases of the pandemic, shifted drug misuse patterns and drug buying behavior and counter lines issues, and because it was really easy to see dealers on the streets in cities, for example. The way things were being dealt became sort of very different. It also became much more dangerous and difficult because dealers saw that their profits were being affected because they were more visible and couldn't make as much money, and so they became more violent, etc., which has an impact on families in particular. And if you're living with somebody that you are who's in your bubble, is your primary problem, an active addict, that has significant issues.
Yes.
And I guess that those types of issues are all coming to the fore in the cause, and Sharon's nodding away there.
Yeah, because this year my son didn't live with me, and where he was living, he got thrown out. And so this was back in May, so we're sort of still in the pandemic.
Yeah.
So I picked him up and booked him into a hotel, and because I didn't want to see him on the street. And then the next day he had nowhere to go, so I literally picked him up and took him home. And my husband said to me, if he comes here, I leave.
Yeah.
But he didn't leave, and he let my son stay for 3 months. And for the first 8 weeks now, he was clean, and he was a different boy. He was the son that I didn't know I had all those years ago.
Yeah.
And then he relapsed, and oh my God, there was sheer carnage.
Yeah.
And in the end, he moved out because I just couldn't do it anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was just one instance. So if you're in a situation where you've got young children and are living with that, it exacerbates it even further. So all those problems, it's like a bomb going to explode.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because we're just touching the tip of the iceberg now.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think also what it's highlighted too is that for some people, and I've hoped that we can find a way around this, but for some people, where I was offering support, people that were in the group that I used to do physically, they were not able to join our groups or to on Zoom, or to have one-to-ones on Zoom, because of the tensions and the anxieties within the household. It was too great a risk, less they get a brick in their face or a good kicking from whoever was using what, if they were on cocaine and alcohol, a lot of violence and so on and so forth. So it's a shame that whilst we've been able to reach thousands, and I do mean thousands of families, and the phone calls are in the thousands, and the families that we're working with are in the thousands, there are many more that we haven't been able to reach because they're too scared. The family members are too scared to pick up the phone while they've got the addict living with them.
Yeah, and so we do need some sort of policy decisions on this. So we're beginning to see policy decisions, for example, around domestic violence. So I think it's Boots, the chemist, has signed up for this program, national program, creating safe spaces, so that if you're in domestic violence at the moment in the UK, you can request of a Boots member a safe space. And there are various organisations, and I'm guessing we need some initiatives like that now around addiction. We come back to the issue that addiction is such a shameful thing, that it's sort of when people talk about addiction, they only think of the addict, and then the attitudes they have around that. And we should say, one, I would challenge that, because addiction's a mental illness, and to isolate and sort of discriminate against people who've got a mental illness is, for me, unacceptable. It should never happen. But actually, we're not talking about addiction here. We're talking about families.
Yeah. But it is as you know, it's a family illness, isn't it? Because the fallout makes it a family illness. It scoots it all up.
But in terms of, you know, trying to get through to people what it is that you're providing, it's services to the families
Yes.
Who are not the addicts, and are as much victims as anybody else.
Very much so. They're very bewildered, very confused, very desperate, very isolated.
And we've talked, you've mentioned a few times, we haven't really gone into, and I'd like to talk a little bit about it. The very specialised work that you do in DrugFAM around those bereaved through the process of addiction, either by their loved one deciding to take their own life, or their loved one dying of some addiction related problem, you know, maybe killed in a drugs deal, maybe overdosing, etc. And again, the response of society to addicts who die for whatever reason is pretty shitty. It has to be said.
It is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It
Sharon?
is.
Yeah.
It is. It is, because just we get examples of, well, you know, they're junkies, they're the scum of the earth, you know, it doesn't matter that they die, doesn't matter, they're just, you know, they're nothing, but they are. They're someone's brother, sister, you know, daughter, husband, wife, partner. They're someone. That's just absolutely, that has to go. Yeah. Because they, you know, their lives are worth talking about, as Elizabeth quite rightly said.
It's the saddest thing I've heard. It was a lady that told me that when her son died, she moved to a particular village, and afterwards, and she shared that with her community and the local priest, who said, well, he deserved to die because he was an addict. And that's very, very difficult to deal with. I think if I had been anywhere near the priest, he might have had one black eye.
He'd have got my fist in his face, to be honest.
Yeah.
Just disgusting.
You know, yeah, so we're dealing with that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, you're also dealing with people who are very compassionate and very supportive. There are a lot of good organizations around that will be extremely supportive. But
and I'm guessing as well, it's sort of an educated guess, but I'm guessing that family members carry some of those feelings themselves, because how could you not? That you project onto your loved one that they are scum, that they do deserve something, and that they're not worth something, and are programmed in that way to respond to their loved one who they've lost in that way, and that complicates the grieving process, I would imagine.
Yes, I think what we don't realise, it's only in hindsight, but what we don't realise is when there is addiction in the family, and it's a son, daughter, partner, whoever, is actually that's almost a bereavement in itself. It's like a living bereavement, because you lose the person loses the identification with you of who they were before all of it swallows them up. And so it's like you're dealing with loss and grief, but in a living way. And then if you get, you know, the actual physical death, if that actually happens, then you're dealing with all the emotions that you've been anticipating happening. But they've actually, in a sense, being at stage one bereavement, grieving for the person that, you know, how could this happen to my child? What if I'd done this? If only I'd done that. And that all that complicated mix of things.
And the person that they might have been without the
grieving for, you know, who they might have been, and what the future might have held for them, and so on.
I guess that is an experience that's very relevant for you, Sharon, in terms of, you know, you have a child who's in an active addiction, and
it's a fear. It's every mother's fear that something will happen, because there's only two ways it's going to go. They will either try and engage with drug and alcohol services and try and help themselves, or if they don't, there's a chance that they might not make it. And I never forget, when just before I started at DrugFAM, I went to the bereavement conference last year, and that was the most powerful thing I've ever been to. It was very humbling and overwhelming, and at the end of it all, I met some amazing people and their strength and what they've been through, and I felt terrible that my son was still alive, because I felt I was one of the lucky ones. So, you know, it's a quite bewildering thing to behold, really, you know.
And you had the conference again this year, didn't you, Elizabeth?
We did, yes.
The bereavement. Tell us about that. Tell us about what happened and what went on.
Well, you know, we had a very successful physical conference last year in 2019, booked the same venue because it was very nice and lots of families members stayed for the weekend there, and that was what we were going to do again this year. But it suddenly became very apparent in March that that was unlikely to happen. So it's like Sharon and I had a council of war meeting, and okay, what are we going to do? Well, shall we go for it? So okay, we'll do it on Zoom. And then we suddenly realized, well, if we get the large quantities, like 100 plus, how are we going to be able to manage that? And we brought in the services of Jasmine Plowright, who managed the whole experience for us on Zoom and took away the angst and the worry of you know, these sort of little chat rooms that we had as part of the conference as well. And that was really good. So we just worked on you know, how we would manage the conference from the point of view of communicating who the keynote speakers were and what the theme of the conference was about and so on. And I think that we had some very good times during every Wednesday morning, every Wednesday you're coming to my house. There's some very good times building up to that without the worry of actually having to physically managing 109 people coming in on a Zoom meeting.
And feed them and so.
And that's right, yes, yeah. They were just asked if they would kindly stay online while they went out and make cups of coffee so that we didn't have to keep letting them back in.
I just want to remind people of the conversation we've just had about bereavement and how remarkable it is that you put on the conference that allows people to experience grieving in a healthy and clean way, because the context of this is that very often what the family member experiences is society and individuals in society telling them that their loved one who's died was scum, and they, you know, why would you waste any time, emotional energy on grieving them, because they weren't worth it anyway. It's good that they're dead. And yet again, Elizabeth, what you've done is you transformed that experience for people, or you allowed the possibility of that transformation and allowing people to do something that is fundamentally human, which is grieve.
Yes, it's very important.
Well, it is. I mean, I can tell you anthropologically, we know how we measure the beginning of human culture is when we started bereavement and grieving rituals. So going way back in time, you know, if you go to look at anthropology and the anthropology of society, the measure of the beginning of human culture is when we started burying people and we started decorating graves. So when we started to grieve the loss of somebody beyond a physical thing. And so this is fundamentally an expression of humanity, that we are hurt by the loss of a loved person.
Yeah.
And to be robbed of that. And it's interesting in this context, I think, in the context of the pandemic, because one of the most shocking things that people saw were the interruptions of these bereavement rituals, funerals, because of the social distancing restrictions and people got it, didn't they? They understood that that's really shocking.
Yeah.
Because it's a shocking interruption into what is a fundamental thing a human being needs to do, which is to grieve the loss of a loved one. And yet that intervention, that denial of the capacity to grieve, is imposed upon the families of addicts as a matter of course.
Yes, so true. Yes,
absolutely, as a matter of course. And yet again, what DrugFAM has done, what you've done as a group of people, an extraordinary group of people, is to say, well, no, that's wrong. I don't care what you think about addiction or that person. There are family members left here who have the right to the experience, that human experience of experiencing their loss.
Very important, because we know that for some of the people who come to the bereavement conference every year, it is a weekend that they put away sacrosanct for remembering their son, daughter, partner. You know, and there have been people who come every year that they know that it's the second Saturday in October, and yet at the same time whilst being there for them, we've also had this great big tranche of newly bereaved come in, some of whom decided that they wanted to be there. And I think it was very, very brave that, you know, having lost somebody during COVID, that they decided that they wanted to come in and have fed back very positively from the experience. One or two were asking, you know, I'm a bit nervous if I get upset, you know, will I be seen, and so on and so forth. And we just reassured them that they would be absolutely fine. And they were.
Yeah. So, you know, there's this amazing range of services, if you're listening, that that DrugFAM offer, which are about reinserting support and services for family members, and reinserting that sort of normal human expectations, what I would call human rights, into people, and trying to challenge some of those stigmas. What's the future looking like for DrugFAM? Is it struggling financially, like a lot of the charitable sector is at the moment? What's happening in terms of DrugFAM and its capacity to survive?
Well, everything's looking pretty good at the moment. We've just been given £100,000 from the Lottery COVID Fund and the Government COVID Fund. So that's really very, very positive for us. Obviously, behind the scenes team working very hard on those kind of applications, working closely with the relevant people. I think there is also the opportunity for that money to be enhanced further, because we're just so busy, and we can evidence that in all our stats and so on. And I think things are okay, but that's to say, you know, not to say that we can't sit on our laurels and say everything's going to be fine, because we've lost the opportunity this year to fundraise to the tune of probably £75,000, because we weren't able to have our annual ball, which the previous time had been £50,000, and a particular event that we were going to do in March had to be cancelled that would have probably brought in about £25,000. So we have to be mindful that we are on a continual fundraising attempts.
And if people want to help with that, having listened, if people want to help with that, Elizabeth, how might they be able to do that?
Well, they can they can contact us at office at DrugFAM, or they can look on our website, which is actually currently being upgraded. So you've got our website's a bit clunky at the moment, but they can donate to the Power of 7 at 70, which is my personal fundraising campaign for my birthday, which is doing quite well.
Notice she was 70.
It's for putting me in the home for old ladies that are not very well.
I don't think they'll take you, Elizabeth. I don't think they won't let you in, mate.
Yes, but you know, even today, I mean, there's a check arrived from people that we've supported. People have sent checks in for £70. They've donated to the appeal. Anything with a multiple of 7 in is fun. That appeal's open until the 5th of October 2021. So yes, there's lots of ways in which they donate. Just pick up the phone to us, 0300 888 3853. We can help.
We've come to the end of the hour, I'm afraid. It flies by, doesn't it?
It does.
Really, it's been really wonderful. I mean, I get to see you both on a regular basis anyway. So I'm very blessed in that I get to meet amazing people. I have amazing people in my life. But for the people sort of listening, again, I want to sort of just say, if you felt sort of moved and triggered by this because of the situation that you're in at the moment, I'm really going to encourage you to call DrugFAM and reach out. If you're in these circumstances that we're describing, help is literally just a phone call away. And I think the really important thing to get across is, as I've been talking to both Elizabeth and Sharon, you've probably forgotten that both of them are mums whose kids were chaotic addicts, and that where both these women have started from is being completely overwhelmed and traumatized by addiction. And yet where they both are today, it sounded like, you know, some really hot shit professionals who are doing a great job of helping other people. And that transformation is available to anybody.
Absolutely.
Help. That's how your life transforms. And that's one of the most wonderful things about DrugFAM, is that, yes, it does have silly professionals like me involved, but the core of it is lived experience.
Yeah.
And the transformation of that lived experience, and how your experience of trauma and the shitty stuff that happens in addiction, and it's really shitty, can transform into something really, really beautiful. And I think Sharon and Elizabeth are beautiful examples of that transformation. So they are sort of walking the walk, and so can you if you're in it. It really can change. We're going to have to finish there. All the contact numbers and the websites will be, web URLs will be there. And it's been wonderful to have you both on the show. It's been wonderful to be back after having had a week away, and I'm glad to say I come back without the dreaded virus.
Oh, that's great.
That's good
Got my
news.
results through today. I'm free. Should be here fighting fit next week as well. Lovely to see you all.
Andrew.
See you all in a week's time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye now. Bye-bye.